My name is Serena Caldwell, and I am 31 years old. I was 8 months into a business degree at the state university, the first person in my immediate family to go back to school after working a full-time job for 6 years. When my in-laws sat me down in their living room and told me the tuition money they had promised was gone. Not because of an emergency. Not because the market had turned, but because my husband's younger brother needed a down payment on a house, and in that family what Elliot needed, Elliot received. That conversation happened on a Thursday evening in late October. My mother-in-law, Sandra, had made tea that nobody touched. My father-in-law, Gerald, sat in his recliner with his hands folded in his lap, the way men do when they've already decided something and are only performing the courtesy of telling you to your face. My husband, Kevin, was sitting next to me on the couch, and I kept waiting for him to say something. He didn't. Let me back up. When Kevin and I got married 4 years ago, his parents made an offer that I want to be honest about, because I think honesty is the only way this story makes sense. They offered to help pay for my education. Their words, unprompted, at our wedding reception. Gerald had pulled me aside near the end of the night, champagne in hand, and said that they had always believed in investing in the people who joined their family, and that if I ever wanted to finish my degree, they would make sure money wasn't the reason I couldn't. I thanked him and I meant it. I had been working as an office manager at a physical therapy clinic since I was 24, good job, decent pay, but a ceiling I could see clearly and couldn't get past without credentials I didn't have. Going back to school at 30 felt terrifying and also like the only door that was still open. So I applied. I got in. And when I told Gerald and Sandra, they handed me a card with the words we meant it written inside and a check that covered my first semester. 2 semesters went fine. I was carrying a 3.7 GPA while working 30 hours a week. I had arranged everything around a plan. The plan had a name on it, and the name was theirs as much as mine. Then Elliot decided he wanted a house. Elliot is 26. He has never held a job longer than 11 months. He has a way of entering a room that makes everyone in it feel like they were there to watch him arrive. He is not a bad person, exactly. He is just a person who has never once in his life been told that something he wanted was not immediately available to him. In 4 years of being in this family, I had watched Gerald and Sandra rearrange vacations, cancel plans, front money, co-sign loans, and once drive 6 hours round trip on a Sunday to bring Elliot a piece of furniture he'd left at their house because he didn't want to rent a truck. Kevin thought this was normal. He had grown up watching it, and it had become the wallpaper of his life, something he stopped seeing a long time ago. So when Elliot found a house he liked in a neighborhood he liked, and discovered that his savings account wasn't going to cover the gap, the solution was obvious to everyone in that family. Everyone except me. The Thursday evening in October, Gerald explained it the way you might explain a slight change in weather. He said they had done some thinking and realized that with Elliot's situation being what it was, they needed to redirect their resources for the time being. He said he hoped I understood that family had to come first. He said it was not permanent. He said that once Elliot was settled, they would look at getting back on track with my schooling. Sandra looked at her tea. Kevin looked at his hands. I looked at Gerald and I felt something I can only describe as a very quiet, very complete kind of clarity. Not the hot clarity of anger which moves fast and burns out. The cold clarity of someone who has just seen the actual shape of a thing they had only been seeing the shadow of. I asked one question. I asked if Kevin had known about this before tonight. There was a pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds is a long time when you are waiting for your husband to answer a question about whether he had allowed you to walk into a conversation like this unprepared. Kevin said he had known for a few days. He said he had wanted to wait until we could all talk together. He said he thought it would be better that way. I nodded. I picked up my tea, which had gone cold, took a sip anyway, and set it back down. I thanked Gerald and Sandra for letting me know. And I said that I understood. I did not say what I understood. I let them assume. On the drive home, Kevin tried to explain. He said his parents had worked hard their whole lives, and it was their money to do with as they chose. He said Elliot was struggling. He said this wasn't about me, it was just about timing. I let him talk. I have learned, over 4 years of marriage, that Kevin processes discomfort by filling silence with justifications, and that the justifications tend to run out on their own if you give them enough room. By the time we pulled into our driveway, he had run out. I said goodnight. I went to bed. I did not sleep. What I did instead was think, for the first time with complete honesty, about what I was actually dealing with. Kevin was not a cruel person. He was a person who had been trained since childhood to absorb whatever his family required and call it love. He had not told me about the conversation because some part of him, the part that had been conditioned since before he could name it, could not fully accept that what they were doing to me was wrong. It was not malicious. It was something almost worse than malicious. It was reflexive. I also thought about Elliot. I thought about the fact that 3 weeks earlier, at a family dinner, I had mentioned to Kevin's cousin Amber that Elliot had gotten fired from his last job because of a complaint filed by a coworker. I had not said it meanly. Amber had asked me how Elliot was doing, and I had told her the truth, which was that things had been rocky at work and he was job searching again. I had not known at the time that Amber and Elliot had a complicated history, or that she was apparently still in contact with some of his former colleagues, or that anything I said at that dinner table would go anywhere at all. What I did know was that 2 days after that dinner, Elliot had called Kevin furious, saying that word had gotten back to someone at the company where he was hoping to get hired, and that he blamed me. Kevin had relayed this information to me with a look on his face that I had not been able to fully interpret at the time. I could interpret it now. The tuition money wasn't just about Elliot's down payment. It was punishment, dressed up as practicality, delivered with Gerald's measured, reasonable voice, but punishment nonetheless. I lay in the dark for a long time thinking about what I wanted to do. Not what I should do. Not what would keep the peace. What I actually wanted. What I wanted was to finish my degree. The rest could be figured out. By 6 in the morning, I was at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee, and I started making a list. I had known, somewhere in the back of my mind, that the in-law tuition arrangement was not something I should have allowed myself to depend on as fully as I had. That is a thing I will admit plainly, because this story is not about me being without fault. I had gotten comfortable. I had stopped looking at alternatives, because the path in front of me seemed clear, and I had trusted the people who had laid it out. That trust, it turned out, had an asterisk. But there were options I had not looked at because I hadn't needed to. The FAFSA I had filled out classified me as an independent student since I was over 24, which meant my income, and Kevin's were what mattered, and our combined income, while not poverty level, was also not high enough to make aid impossible. I started with the financial aid office. I sent an email at 6:45 in the morning explaining that my financial circumstances had changed and asking for an emergency appointment. I also called my own mother. My mother is not a woman of significant financial means. She raised me and my sister mostly alone after my father left when I was 9, worked as a dental receptionist for 22 years, and has the particular kind of quiet toughness that comes from 2 decades of making things work on a budget that left no margin for error. She picked up on the second ring, even though it was barely 7 in the morning, because she is my mother, and she knew from the sound of my voice and the single word I said when she answered that something had happened. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "All right, let's figure it out. Not it's going to be fine. Not those people are terrible. Just, let's figure it out." I have heard a lot of words in my life, and those 4 in that order, from her voice, are the ones I would choose if I could only keep a few. She said she had some money set aside. Not a lot, but some. She said if I needed it, it was mine, not a loan, just mine. I told her I would let her know. Kevin came downstairs around 8 and found me at the kitchen table with spreadsheets open and my phone on the charger and an expression he had never quite seen on me before. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was working on the tuition problem. He sat down across from me and said that he had been thinking and that maybe they could work something out with his parents. Maybe if Elliot got settled faster than expected. I stopped him. Not unkindly. I just said his name once. The way you say someone's name when you need them to hear the sentence before you say it. I said that I was not going to spend the next year or 2, or however long, waiting to see if Elliot's timeline freed up space for mine. I said that I had found 3 options that did not involve his parents, and that I was going to pursue all 3 of them simultaneously. I said I was also going to need us to have a separate conversation, not about money, about the fact that he had known for several days that this was happening and had chosen not to tell me. He said he understood. I told him I hoped so. The financial aid office appointment was 3 days later. The counselor, a woman named Ms. Peterson, who had a desk covered in sticky notes, and the energy of someone who had helped people out of exactly this kind of situation many times before, walked me through a revised aid package that included a federal subsidized loan, a small institutional grant for returning adult students, and a work-study option at the university's health administration office that aligned, almost perfectly, with the kind of work I was already doing at the clinic. It wouldn't cover everything, but with my existing income, my mother's contribution, and a tighter budget, it covered enough. I signed the paperwork before I left her office. Walking out of that building into the cold November air, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 days, which is to say, since that Thursday evening with the untouched tea and Gerald's reasonable voice. I felt like the ground was under my feet again. I did not tell Kevin's family what I had arranged. I didn't call Sandra to update her. I didn't text Gerald to let him know I had figured it out. I registered for my spring semester classes, paid the remaining balance, and I got back to work. What I did not expect, what I had not seen coming and had not prepared any version of myself for, was the phone call I got 11 days later from Kevin's phone at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, which was unusual because Kevin was supposed to be in a meeting until 4. He sounded strange. Not upset strange. Scared strange. There is a difference. He said, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. I said, okay. He said, did you contact anyone at Elliot's new job? I want you to sit with that question for a moment, because I did. I had not contacted anyone at Elliot's new job. I had not sent emails or made calls or reached out to anyone connected to Elliot's professional life. In the 11 days since the living room conversation, I had directed every unit of my energy toward my own situation and had given exactly 0 of it to Elliot's. But Kevin was scared. Not suspicious of me in a hostile way, scared in the way of a man who had just found out something that had reordered what he thought he knew. And the fear in his voice, I realized, was not about me. It was about what he was afraid I might have done because of what his family had done to me. He was doing the math, and the math was making him sick. I told him the truth. I said I hadn't contacted anyone. I said I had been working on financial aid and studying for midterms, and that Elliot had not factored into my days at all. He went quiet. Not the pausing to think quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something difficult. He said that Elliot had not gotten the job at the company he'd been interviewing with. He said the offer had been rescinded after a reference check that had apparently turned up some concerns. He said Elliot was telling the family that I was responsible, that I had called someone, that this was retaliation for the tuition situation. He said Gerald and Sandra believed him. I said I understood, and then I asked Kevin directly whether he believed him. There was a pause. Kevin said no. He said it quietly. The way you say something when saying it means letting go of a version of the world you had been holding on to. He said he didn't believe it, and that he had told his parents he didn't believe it, and that his father had told him he was letting me turn him against his own family. I asked him what he had said to that. He said he had hung up. I did not feel triumphant about this. I want to be clear about that, because this is not a story about winning. Kevin hanging up on his father was not a prize. It was a man doing something very hard and very overdue and probably very painful, and the fact that it needed to happen did not make it easy to watch. What happened over the next several days came out in pieces, through Kevin's conversations with his parents, and then eventually through Sandra, who called me directly on a Sunday morning and spoke in the careful, tired voice of a woman who has realized something she would have preferred not to. Elliot's reference check had not gone wrong because of anything I did. It had gone wrong because one of the professional references Elliot had listed, a former supervisor named Howard, had given a response that raised concerns about Elliot's ability to work collaboratively and his habit of, in Howard's apparent phrasing, reframing team accomplishments as individual ones. Howard had been contacted in the normal course of a reference check. He had told the truth, and the truth, it turned out, had been waiting patiently in the background for quite some time. The story Elliot had constructed, where I had reached out, made calls, poisoned the well, was built entirely out of guilt and fear. He had known that his professional reputation had vulnerabilities. He had known that his last exit had been less than clean. And when the job offer disappeared, he had needed a reason that wasn't himself. I was available. I was convenient. I was already, in the family narrative, the person who had caused him problems before. Sandra told me in that Sunday phone call that Gerald had spoken to Howard directly after Elliot's account started to unravel. She told me that they had not known the full picture of why Elliot had left his last position. She told me she was sorry, not in a performed way, but in the way of someone genuinely processing something they had missed and were embarrassed to have missed. I said I appreciated her telling me. I said I also needed her to understand something. I said that what had happened in their living room that Thursday in October had not been a misunderstanding. They had made a promise, a real one, and they had broken it. And the breaking of it had been used as leverage in a way that I was not going to simply absorb and move past, without naming clearly. I said I was not angry in a way that required an argument. I was clear in a way that required honesty. She said she understood. I told her I hoped so. Kevin and I had the harder conversation a few days after that. Not about his parents, not about Elliot, but about the days between when he found out and when he told me. About the conditioned reflex to protect his family from discomfort at my expense. About what it meant that his first instinct had been to manage the information rather than share it. That conversation took 2 hours and a lot of uncomfortable honesty, and it did not end with everything resolved, because things like that don't resolve in a single conversation. But it ended with both of us still in the room, which I count as something. The financial aid came through in full before spring semester started. My work-study position turned out to be something I was genuinely good at, which should not have surprised me but did a little, the way it sometimes does when a door opens into a room that fits you. My mother came to visit in February. We sat at my kitchen table with coffee, and she asked how things were, and I told her honestly, some things are still getting sorted. She nodded like that was a reasonable answer, which it was. Gerald called me once about 6 weeks after everything. Not to relitigate, not to defend. Just to say that he had been wrong about the money and wrong about the timeline, and that he would like, when I was ready, to talk about making it right. It was not a full accounting of everything. But it was real, and I have found that real is what I have to work with. Elliot and I are not in contact. That may change. It may not. I don't spend time deciding what the future of that has to look like. Some doors close slowly and some of them close all at once, and I have stopped trying to predict which kind this is. What I know is that I am 6 weeks from finishing my degree. I have a work-study position that turned into a part-time offer from the university's health administration department. I wake up most mornings now without the particular low-grade dread that had been living in my chest for most of last year. The kind you stop noticing until it lifts, and the absence of it is almost loud. There is a piece of paper on my desk. Not a diploma, not yet. Just the confirmation of enrollment for my final semester, printed out and sitting in a plain folder next to my coffee mug. Some mornings I look at it for about 3 seconds before I start working. Those 3 seconds cost me a lot to earn, and no one is ever going to take them from me again. If you've ever been the person in the room whose future was used as a bargaining chip so someone else's comfort could be preserved, you don't need me to explain why I'm telling this story. You already know. Subscribe and hit the bell. I'll be back with another one.